before the sun rises, before light fully touches the water, the city is already awake. In the faint darkness of early morning, Tenochtitlan rests quietly on the lake, floating between mist and reflection. The air is cool, almost still. Water surrounds the city like a gentle barrier, broken only by narrow canals that stretch inward like veins. Somewhere far away, a paddle dips softly into the lake, sending slow ripples across the surface. This is the hour when the day begins without noise. Canoes move silently through the canals, their wooden sides gliding past stone embankments. Each carries something simple, bundles of maize wrapped in cloth, baskets of vegetables still damp from morning dew, clay pots carefully balanced so they do not tip. The people inside the boats do not speak much. Words are unnecessary at this hour. Everyone knows where they are going. Above them, the sky slowly changes color. Deep blue fades into gray, then into a pale, uncertain light. The city's great structures remain mostly in shadow, their outlines calm and unmoving. From a distance, Tenochtitlan appears less like a capital of power and more like a living island, gently breathing as the morning unfolds. Along the causeways, footsteps begin to sound, soft, measured, unhurried. Farmers arrive on foot from nearby lands, their loads carried on their backs. Traders from distant villages step onto the stone paths after long journeys, adjusting their cloaks against the morning chill. No one rushes. The market will not open all at once. It never does. The smell of water plants, earth, and smoke from early cooking fires mixes in the air. Somewhere, a small flame flickers to life as someone prepares the first meal of the day. Not a feast, just enough to carry them through the long hours ahead. This moment belongs to balance. Night has not fully released its hold, and day has not yet claimed the city. The lake reflects both worlds at once. Above the water, birds pass silently overhead, their shapes barely visible against the brightening sky. Below them, the city waits. Soon the market will fill with voices, movement, and trade. Paths will become crowded. Goods will change hands. But for now, everything is gentle. The people who arrive early understand this quiet. They move through it with care, as if not to disturb the city itself. The market is not yet a place of exchange. It is simply a place. And as the sun finally begins to rise, its light touching the water first, then the stone, then the people, the day in the Aztec world begins, slowly, naturally, without urgency. To understand daily life in the Aztec markets, one must first understand the city itself, because the market was not separate from the city. It was born from it, shaped by it, and sustained by the water beneath it. At the center of this world stood Tenochtitlan, a city unlike any most people today could easily imagine. It did not rise from dry land or spread outward across fields. Instead, it rested on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, surrounded by water in every direction. The lake was not an obstacle to be conquered. It was the foundation of everything. From above, the city appeared carefully planned, almost deliberate. Straight causeways stretched outward from the island like spokes, connecting the city to the mainland. Between stone buildings and neighborhoods ran canals, wide enough for canoes to pass easily. Water flowed calmly through daily life, just as naturally as streets do in modern cities. For the people who lived there, this arrangement was not extraordinary. It was normal. Children grew up learning to balance in boats before they could walk long distances. Adults understood the rhythm of water instinctively, when it was calm, when it was dangerous, when it could be trusted. The city did not fight the lake. It listened to it. Homes were built close together, constructed from stone, adobe, and wood. Many had small courtyards where daily chores were done quietly, grinding maize, weaving cloth, repairing tools. Water was never far away. A canal might run just outside a doorway, reflecting the sky above and the movement of passing boats. Every morning, the city awakened gradually. Light touched the water first, then climbed the walls of temples and homes. Mist often lingered over the canals, softening edges and slowing the pace of thought. Sounds traveled differently here. Voices carried across water, footsteps echoed gently against stone. This environment shaped behavior. People moved with care, not because they feared the city, but because the city required balance. Running was rare. Shouting was unnecessary. Even crowds, when they formed, flowed rather than collided. The water taught patience. Beyond the residential areas lay the Chinempas, long, narrow agricultural plots built directly into the lake. These floating gardens were among the most productive farming systems in the world at the time. Crops grew in neat rows: maize, beans, squash, chilies, herbs. Canals between the plots allowed farmers to paddle directly to their fields, harvest their produce, and transport it straight to the markets without ever touching dry land. This closeness between farm and market was essential. Food did not travel far. What was harvested in the morning could be sold before midday. Freshness was not a luxury, it was the standard. The lake made this possible, serving as both road and reservoir. The causeways that connected the city to the mainland were more than simple roads. They were controlled points of movement, wide enough for foot traffic but carefully managed. At certain points, wooden bridges could be raised or removed, allowing the city to defend itself if needed. Yet most days, these causeways were peaceful, used by travelers, traders, and farmers arriving with quiet purpose. Water gates and channels regulated the lake's flow, protecting the city from flooding while maintaining access to fresh water. Engineers and laborers maintained these systems constantly, though their work was rarely noticed. When everything functioned correctly, the city felt effortless, almost weightless. Religion, governance, and daily life were tightly woven into the city's layout. Massive temples rose near the center, visible from nearly everywhere. Their presence was constant but not overwhelming. They stood as reminders rather than interruptions. The market, especially the Great Market at Tenochtitlan, existed as part of this design, not separate from it. It was placed where water routes, causeways, and footpaths naturally converged. No one had to force people toward it. The city itself guided them there. As the day progressed, the water around Tenochtitlan changed character. Morning stillness gave way to gentle movement. Canoes increased in number, gliding past one another with practiced ease. Some carried goods, others carried people, many carried both. There was no confusion. Each paddler understood the unspoken rules of the canals. Above the water, life continued at a measured pace. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Cloth hung to dry in courtyards. Tools were sharpened. Conversations unfolded slowly, often punctuated by long pauses. This was not a city driven by urgency. Time moved differently here. Without mechanical clocks, the day was guided by light, shadow, and routine. People knew when to work, when to rest, and when to trade, not by numbers but by feeling. The city itself seemed to breathe, expanding with activity and contracting into quiet. For visitors arriving for the first time, the sight was overwhelming. A vast city, rising from water, orderly and alive. But for its inhabitants, it was simply home. And it was this unique environment, this floating balance of stone and lake, that made the markets possible. Every exchange, every voice, every basket of goods carried the influence of water. The market did not exist despite the lake. It existed because of it. By the time the sun climbed higher and the markets began to fill, the city had already done its quiet work. It had carried people where they needed to go, supported fields and homes alike, and prepared the ground, both literal and unseen, for the long day of trade ahead. The city floated, yes, but more importantly, it endured. The market did not suddenly appear full. It was not a place that came alive all at once, as if summoned by a signal or a bell. Instead, it gathered itself slowly. shaped by countless small journeys that began long before most of the city had fully awakened. To understand the Aztec market, one must first understand these journeys, quiet, deliberate, and deeply familiar to the people who made them every day. In and around Tenochtitlan, movement followed patterns as old as the city itself. The lake, the causeways, the canals, and the paths through Chinampas all served as arteries, carrying people toward the same shared destination. Each route told its own story, and each arrival added another layer to the market's life. For many, the journey began on the water. Before sunrise, canoes slipped quietly into the canals, their paddles cutting through the surface with barely a sound. These were not hurried vessels. They moved at a steady pace, guided by experience rather than speed. The people inside sat low, surrounded by baskets, bundles, and carefully balanced loads. Produce harvested only hours earlier, maize, beans, squash, chilies, rested beside flowers wrapped gently to protect their petals. Water travel was not a novelty here. It was routine. Children learned to sit steady in canoes from a young age, watching elders paddle with effortless rhythm. Steering through narrow channels required attention but not strain. The canals were familiar, their turns memorized through years of repetition. As the canoes approached the city's central areas, traffic increased, but never became chaotic. Paddlers adjusted their paths naturally, slowing or drifting aside when needed. No one called out instructions. Courtesy was understood without words. Some travelers had come from far beyond the city's edge. From distant villages, traders began their journeys days earlier, walking along dirt paths that led toward the great causeways. They carried goods not grown nearby: obsidian blades, woven textiles, pottery, dried foods, feathers, and tools crafted with regional skill. Their loads were secured with straps across the forehead or shoulders, balanced carefully to reduce strain. When these travelers reached the causeways, they joined the steady flow moving toward the island city. The stone roads stretched straight across the lake, wide enough to allow passage in both directions. Walking here felt different from walking on open land. Water surrounded the path on either side, reflecting the sky and making each step feel suspended between worlds. Along these causeways, no one rushed. Travelers paused when needed, adjusting their loads, sharing quiet words, or simply watching the water below. The journey itself was part of the day's rhythm, not an obstacle to overcome. Fatigue was expected, not resisted. Closer to the city, local farmers joined the flow. From the Chinampas, men and women paddled short distances from their floating fields directly into the canal network. Their journeys were brief but essential. They knew exactly when to harvest, how much to bring, and where to go. Over time, these decisions became instinctive. Too much produce would go unsold. Too little would waste opportunity. Many farmers traveled together, their canoes drifting side by side as they entered wider channels. They exchanged small remarks about weather, water levels, or the condition of crops, but conversation remained minimal. Words were saved for later when trade began. Not everyone arrived by water or from afar. Within the city itself, people emerged from homes as the morning light grew stronger. Artisans carried finished goods wrapped in cloth. Potters transported vessels cushioned against impact. Weavers folded textiles carefully, protecting them from damp air. Each person knew where they were going and why. Children sometimes accompanied adults, learning by observation rather than instruction. They watched how loads were balanced, how paths were chosen, how greetings were exchanged. The market was not just a place to sell, it was a place to learn how the world worked. As people approached the market area, movement slowed even further. Canoes were guided to landing points, tied securely and unloaded with care. Goods were lifted out gently, never dropped. On foot, travelers adjusted their posture after long walks, stretching briefly before continuing. No one burst into the market space abruptly. Arrival was gradual, almost ceremonial. This mattered. The Aztec market was not merely an economic center, it was a shared social environment. How one entered it reflected respect for the space and for others within it. Loud entrances, aggressive movement, or careless handling of goods would have stood out, not because rules forbade them, but because custom discouraged them. By mid-morning, the paths leading to the market had become familiar streams of motion. People continued to arrive, but the pace remained calm. The market did not demand urgency. It accepted whoever came, whenever they arrived, as long as they followed the unspoken rhythm. What is striking, when viewed from a distance, is how little effort this coordination seemed to require. There were no signs directing traffic, no officials shouting commands. Order emerged naturally from shared understanding. Everyone knew their role because everyone had once been new, guided quietly by example. Even strangers from distant regions adapted quickly. After a single visit, they understood where to walk, where to stop, and how to move among others. The city itself taught them. By the time the market space itself began to fill, before voices rose and trade commenced, it had already been shaped by these journeys. Each step, each paddle stroke, each careful adjustment of a bundle contributed to the atmosphere of balance. The market was not just a destination. It was the meeting point of countless paths, converging not in haste, but in harmony. And long before the first exchange took place, the act of arriving had already begun the work of the day. The market did not announce itself with noise. There was no sudden roar, no sharp signal to mark its beginning. Instead, sound arrived the same way people had, slowly, gently, and almost without notice. At first, the space was defined more by what could not yet be heard than by what could. Footsteps were soft. Canoes settling against stone made low, hollow taps. Cloth shifted as bundles were placed on the ground. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, this was how trade began. The earliest sounds were practical. A basket touched earth. A clay vessel was set down with care. A wooden frame creaked slightly as a trader adjusted its position. These sounds carried no urgency. They were part of preparation, not exchange. People were arranging their small sections of space, laying out the shape of the day before filling it with words. Voices came next, but quietly. A greeting here, a brief acknowledgement there. Not conversations, not negotiations, just recognition. Many of the people in the market had seen one another countless times before. They did not need introductions. A nod was enough. A short phrase spoken low carried meaning without drawing attention. The market floor itself began to change character as these sounds accumulated. What had been open space slowly gained texture. Mats were unrolled. Goods were aligned. Colors appeared muted at first, still softened by morning light. Reds, browns, greens, and the pale hues of maize husks blended together, forming a calm visual rhythm rather than a clash. As more people arrived, the sound deepened but did not sharpen. The Aztec market was large, vast by any standard, but its soundscape remained controlled. There was no shouting to attract attention. Trade did not depend on spectacle. Buyers moved slowly, observing, listening, comparing. Sellers waited. This waiting was important. In many markets across history, the loudest voice wins. Here, patience mattered more. Sellers trusted that quality would be noticed. Buyers trusted that time spent observing would lead them to what they needed. Sound followed this shared trust. When the first exchanges began, they were almost intimate. A buyer stopped. A seller looked up. Words were exchanged quietly, names of goods, quantities, expectations. Hands moved carefully as items were examined. A basket was opened, then closed again. A bundle was untied just enough to reveal its contents. These early transactions set the tone. Once a few trades had taken place, the market's voice grew slightly stronger. not louder but fuller. More conversations overlapped, creating a soft hum. Individual words blended into a steady background presence, like wind moving through reeds or water brushing against stone. This was the sound of order. Even disagreements, when they occurred, were restrained. Negotiation was not a contest of volume. It was a measured exchange, shaped by shared understanding of value. If an agreement could not be reached, both parties simply moved on. There was no need to press the moment. Children's voices appeared briefly, then faded. Some accompanied parents, sent on small errands or asked to observe. Their sounds were lighter, less controlled, quick questions, short bursts of laughter, but they were gently absorbed into the larger rhythm. Adults did not silence them harshly. The market was a place of learning as much as trade. As the sun climbed higher, sound changed again. Foot traffic increased. Canoes arrived more frequently at the edges of the market, their paddles now audible among the voices. Goods from farther regions entered the space, objects unfamiliar to some, drawing brief murmurs of interest. Still, curiosity expressed itself quietly. What is striking is how rarely the market felt crowded, even when it was full. People adjusted their movements instinctively. They stepped aside without being asked. They waited without irritation. Sound followed movement, never overwhelming it. The absence of urgency shaped everything. There were moments of pause. A seller might stop speaking to adjust a display. A buyer might stand silently, considering. These pauses were not interruptions. They were part of the flow. Silence existed alongside sound, each making the other more noticeable. From a distance, the market sounded alive but calm. From within, it felt almost meditative. Each sound had a purpose, but none demanded attention. The mind could wander without losing its place. For someone listening while drifting towards sleep, the market sound would not pull them awake. It would guide them deeper into rest. As the morning advanced, the hum became steadier, more continuous. Individual beginnings faded into a shared present. No one remembered exactly when trade had started. It simply was. This lack of a clear beginning mattered. It meant that the market belonged to no single moment or person. It was not opened by authority or closed by command. It existed because people came together and allowed it to exist. Sound was merely the evidence of that agreement. Even the sellers who depended on the market for survival did not treat it with anxiety. Their voices did not betray fear of failure or hunger. They trusted the rhythm of the place. Tomorrow would come, just as today had. By late morning, the market's sound reached its most complete form. Hundreds of conversations overlapped, yet none dominated. The hum was dense but soft, constant but gentle. It was the sound of a system functioning smoothly, not through force, but through familiarity. And beneath it all, the lake remained present. Water lapped quietly against stone at the edges of the market. Canoes arrived and departed, their movement adding low, steady notes to the soundscape. The city breathed through these sounds, grounding the market in its floating world. For those who lived here, these sounds were not remarkable. They were as normal as wind or footsteps at home. But for anyone listening closely, especially in the quiet space between wakefulness and sleep, they told a story of balance, a story of people who understood that trade did not need noise to be alive. The first sounds of trade were never meant to wake the city. They were meant to carry it gently into the day. In the markets of Tenochtitlan, value did not clink, jingle, or shine. There were no metal coins exchanged from hand to hand, no stamped faces of rulers, no cold weight of currency collected in purses. Instead, value existed in forms that could be touched, smelled, tasted, or used. It lived in everyday objects, things that fed households, clothed families, or quietly supported life as it unfolded. To step into the market was to step into a world where money was not abstract. Here, worth was visible. Cacao beans were among the closest things to a common medium of exchange, yet even they were not money in the modern sense. Small, dark, and carefully counted, cacao beans could be traded for simple items, food, tools, small services, but they were never removed from their identity as cacao. They could still be ground, mixed, and consumed. Their value came not from authority, but from shared agreement and usefulness. Alongside cacao beans, cloth carried weight far beyond its softness. Textiles, especially finely woven cotton, were among the most respected items in the market. Cloth represented time, skill, and patience. Every thread spoke of hours spent weaving, of knowledge passed down quietly through generations. A well-made garment was not merely clothing, it was labor made visible. People did not rush to exchange such items. When cloth was traded, it was unfolded slowly, smoothed with care, examined under the light. Fingers traced patterns not for decoration alone, but to feel consistency and strength. A single piece of fabric might pass through several hands before an agreement was reached. Food formed the steady foundation of the market. Maize appeared everywhere, whole ears, dried kernels, ground flour. It was not dramatic, not rare, but essential. Beans, squash, chilies, and herbs filled baskets arranged with quiet pride. These were the foods that sustained households, cooked daily without ceremony. Freshness mattered more than abundance. Buyers leaned in slightly to inspect produce, noting color, firmness, and smell. Sellers did not exaggerate. They did not need to. The closeness of farms to market ensured quality spoke for itself. A basket of wilted greens would find no takers, not because of punishment, but because trust mattered. Animal products moved through the market with similar restraint. Turkeys, fish, insects prepared for food, and other sources of protein were offered plainly. They were not displayed for spectacle. They were necessities, traded with respect for their role in daily nourishment. Nothing about their presence felt excessive. Beyond food and cloth, tools filled quiet corners of the market. Stone blades, obsidian knives, grinding stones, and wooden implements lay arranged carefully. These were objects of function, not decoration. Buyers tested weight and balance, turning items in their hands before deciding. A poorly made tool wasted effort. A good one saved it. This understanding shaped every exchange. Value was not fixed. It was negotiated through familiarity. People knew what things were worth because they used them. There was no need for posted prices. Experience replaced numbers. Some goods carried value beyond daily survival. Feathers, especially bright or rare ones, were traded with particular care. They were light, delicate, and difficult to obtain. Their worth came from distance and rarity, from the places they traveled before arriving at the market. A feather could represent many days of journey, many hands involved. Jewelry and ornaments appeared, but modestly. Gold existed, but it was not central to daily trade. It did not dominate attention. Precious items were appreciated quietly, often by those who understood their symbolic meaning rather than their material shine. The market did not revolve around luxury. It absorbed it gently. Services, too, had value. People exchanged labor, skill, and time. A repair might be traded for food, advice for goods, knowledge for assistance. These exchanges were informal, woven into conversation rather than announced. The market recognized contribution in many forms, not all of them tangible. What made this system work was not complexity, but shared understanding. Everyone arrived with a sense of proportion. Taking more than one gave disrupted balance. Offering too little damaged reputation. Trust moved through the market invisibly, reinforced by repetition and memory. A dishonest trader would not be punished loudly, but they would be avoided. Avoidance was enough. Over time, each person learned which stalls to visit, which sellers to trust, which goods consistently met expectation. The market remembered, even if no one spoke about it openly. Children observed this carefully. They learned value not from coins, but from watching how adults behaved. They saw patience rewarded, care respected, and excess discouraged. They understood that worth was not something declared, it was something recognized. As the day continued, exchanges increased in number but not in intensity. No one hoarded. No one rushed to convert goods into something else. Trade served life, not ambition. People came with needs and left when those needs were met. Remaining longer than necessary was uncommon. This absence of accumulation shaped the mood. The market did not feel anxious. There was no sense of scarcity looming at every corner. Goods moved because they were needed, not because they could be exploited. This did not mean hardship did not exist, but it did mean the market itself was not driven by fear. In such a system, silence played a role. Long pauses during negotiation were normal. A buyer might stand quietly, weighing options internally. A seller waited without pressing. Time was allowed to do its work. From the outside, this might appear inefficient. From within, it felt humane. The lack of coins removed a layer of abstraction. It kept trade grounded in reality. Every exchange carried a reminder of effort, origin, and purpose. Nothing felt detached from life. As the sun moved higher and the market reached its steady rhythm, goods continued to change hands quietly. No bells rang. No counters clicked. The only record of trade was memory, and memory was enough. When people left the market, they did not carry wealth in pockets. They carried food for the evening, tools for work, cloth for warmth, or items meant for ceremony. They carried what they needed to continue living. And in doing so, they completed the cycle the market existed to serve. In a world without coins, value did not disappear. It simply took forms that could be held gently, examined slowly, and released when their purpose was fulfilled. Before anyone spoke of prices or exchange, the market announced itself through scent. It drifted gently through the air, carried by water and warmth, settling quietly into memory. In Tenochtitlan, smell was the first invitation to the market and the last thing to fade when the day ended. It did not overwhelm. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, layered, familiar, and deeply tied to daily life. The earliest scents were subtle. Damp earth from the chinempas clung to freshly harvested vegetables. Maize husks carried a dry, faint sweetness. The lake itself contributed a cool, mineral presence that lingered beneath everything else. These smells blended naturally, not competing, but supporting one another like quiet notes in a slow rhythm. As the morning progressed, warmth awakened deeper aromas. Somewhere near the edges of the market, small cooking fires burned steadily. They were not dramatic flames, just enough heat to prepare food meant for long hours of work. The smell of maize dough warming on flat surfaces rose slowly, soft and grounding. It was not the sharp scent of roasting, but a gentle reminder of nourishment. Food in the Aztec market was not prepared to impress. It was prepared to sustain. Tamales, wrapped carefully in leaves, released a muted fragrance when opened. Steam escaped briefly, then vanished into the air. The scent lingered only a moment, just long enough to be noticed, then absorbed into the larger atmosphere. These were not foods meant to draw crowds. They were meant to be eaten quietly, without interruption. Chilies added another layer. Their presence was unmistakable but restrained. Dried chilies carried a smoky depth, while fresh ones offered a sharper, greener note. They did not burn the air. Instead, they reminded passers-by of heat waiting patiently, to be released later in cooking, not now in the open market. Beans contributed an earthy richness. Cooked slowly and often prepared in advance, they gave off a steady, comforting aroma. This was the smell of meals eaten daily, of routines repeated without complaint. It was the scent of reliability, nothing exotic, nothing rare but deeply necessary. Fish arrived with the water. Fresh from Lake Texcoco, fish carried a clean, unmistakable smell of the lake itself. Not unpleasant, not strong, simply present. It spoke of early mornings, of nets drawn in quietly, of food that moved directly from water to market without delay. Insects prepared for eating added yet another note. To some, unfamiliar. To others, completely normal. Toasted lightly, they produced a dry, nut-like scent that blended easily with maize and herbs. No one reacted to these smells with surprise. They belonged here as much as anything else. Herbs softened the air. Bundles of fresh leaves, used for flavoring, medicine, or ritual, released gentle fragrances when touched or rearranged. Some were sharp and clean, others sweet or bitter. They hung in the air briefly, then faded, never lingering too long. The market did not allow any single scent to dominate. This balance mattered. Strong smells would have disrupted the calm. The Aztec market, like the city itself, valued equilibrium. Food was present everywhere, yet it never became overwhelming. Each aroma arrived, played its role, and receded. Buyers moved slowly through this invisible landscape. They did not need to ask what was being prepared. Their noses guided them. A pause here, a turn there, small decisions influenced by scent as much as sight. Sellers noticed this but did not exploit it. They trusted that those who needed food would find it. Eating in the market was not a public performance. People stood or sat quietly, unwrapping food without ceremony. There was no rush, no lingering display. Meals were brief, functional, and respectful of the shared space. Sounds of eating were minimal. The act itself blended into the background. Children sometimes paused longer. Drawn by unfamiliar smells or warmth, they watched adults eat, absorbing habits without instruction. A bite offered here, a quiet word there. Food taught patience and restraint as much as it provided energy. As midday approached, the air grew warmer and smells shifted slightly. Cooked food became more noticeable, not because more was prepared, but because heat carried scent farther. Even then, the market did not feel heavy. Open air and water kept everything moving. Nothing stagnated. What is striking is how little waste existed in these smells. There was no sense of excess, no clashing aromas suggesting overproduction or indulgence. Food appeared in quantities meant to be consumed. Leftovers were rare. Unsold items would return home, not discarded. This shaped the emotional tone of the market. The smell of food did not provoke urgency or hunger-driven impatience. It reassured. It reminded people that nourishment was available, that the day could proceed without fear. For visitors unfamiliar with this world, the experience could feel grounding. Here was a city where food did not shout for attention, where meals were woven gently into the flow of life, where smell served as a quiet guide rather than a temptation. As the afternoon advanced, cooking fires diminished. The air slowly returned to the sense of earth, water, and woven fibers. Food smells faded not abruptly, but naturally, leaving behind a memory rather than an absence. By the time the market began its gradual quieting, the air told the story of the day. Not through noise, not through spectacle, but through layers that had come and gone. Smell recorded what sound did not, the steady presence of nourishment, the calm assurance that life had been supported once again. For those who lived in Tenochtitlan, this was comfort. For those listening centuries later, drifting toward sleep, it remains a reminder that even in a vast and complex city, daily life could move gently, carried on the air, sustained by food, and guided by balance rather than excess. In the market of Tenochtitlan, clothing spoke softly. It did not announce wealth with glitter or demand attention with excess. Instead, it communicated through restraint, through texture, pattern, and color chosen with care. A person's place in the world could often be understood without a single word spoken, simply by noticing how fabric rested on the body and how color moved through the crowd. This quiet language shaped the atmosphere of the market as much as sound or smell. Most people wore garments made from cotton or maguey fiber, woven into simple forms that allowed ease of movement. These clothes were practical first. They protected from sun and wind, allowed long hours of work, and could be repaired again and again. Their value lay not in novelty, but in reliability. Yet simplicity did not mean uniformity. Even among everyday clothing, variation existed. The weave might be tighter, the pattern more refined, the edges more carefully finished. These differences were not shouted. They were noticed only by those who knew how to look. Color played a subtle role. Natural dyes produced hues drawn from plants, insects, and minerals. Reds, browns, creams, soft blues, none harsh, none overpowering. Bright colors appeared, but sparingly, and often reserved for garments meant to last. Color did not overwhelm the market. It flowed through it gently, like water reflecting sky. For artisans and traders, clothing balanced identity and function. A weaver might wear a garment that quietly demonstrated skill, clean lines, even stitching, a confident pattern. A farmer's clothing bore signs of labor, softened fabric, repaired seams, stains that spoke of fields and water. These marks were not flaws. They were evidence of usefulness. No one hurried to hide them. Status here was not performed loudly. Those of higher rank wore finer cloth, often with more complex designs. Feathers or embroidery might appear, but always measured. Excess would have disrupted the calm. The market was not a place for display. It was a place for participation. Even nobles who entered the market did so without spectacle. Their clothing distinguished them, yes, but quietly. The quality of the fabric, the confidence of posture, the way others made space without being asked, these were the signals that mattered. No guard announced their arrival. No crowd parted dramatically. Recognition moved invisibly. Women's clothing reflected similar balance. Garments were designed for work as much as comfort, allowing freedom of movement. Patterns could indicate region, family tradition, or personal taste. Hair was often arranged carefully, not for vanity but for order. Appearance signaled readiness, not desire for attention. Children's clothing told a story of learning. Simple, often reused or adapted from older garments, it carried signs of growth and adjustment. As children moved through the market, their clothes marked them as observers, apprentices to the rhythms of adult life. They learned early that how one dressed affected how one was received. What is striking is how little competition existed around appearance. There was no rush to outshine others, no anxiety about being seen as lesser. Clothing served its purpose, to reflect one's role, to allow one to move through the day with ease. Pride existed, but it was quiet pride, rooted in effort rather than display. Textiles themselves were among the most respected goods in the market. Woven cloth was examined slowly, unfolded carefully. Buyers touched fabric lightly, feeling density and strength. Sellers waited without pressure. Everyone understood the labor involved. Hours, days, sometimes weeks of work were held within each piece. This understanding shaped behavior. A fine garment was not worn casually. It was chosen intentionally, saved for moments when representation mattered. Everyday clothing absorbed where so that better pieces could endure. Nothing was wasted thoughtlessly. Colors carried meaning without explanation. Certain patterns or hues suggested regional origin. Others hinted at ceremonial use. These meanings were not written or declared. They were shared knowledge, passed quietly from one generation to the next. In the market, this shared understanding reduced friction. People knew how to approach one another. They adjusted tone and posture instinctively. Clothing guided interaction, smoothing exchanges before words were spoken. As the day progressed and the sun shifted, fabric responded. Colors deepened or softened with changing light. Cotton breathed, moving gently with air. Worn garments became more comfortable as the day warmed. Clothing lived with the body, not against it. By afternoon, the market appeared like a woven tapestry of human presence. No single color dominated. No garment drew the eye too long. Movement blended everything together, creating harmony rather than contrast. Even those passing through briefly became part of this visual balance. This harmony mattered deeply. It reinforced the idea that the market belonged to everyone. No one stood apart entirely. Difference existed, but it did not fracture the space. Clothing allowed distinction without division. As people prepared to leave, garments told another story. Cloth folded carefully, bundles secured. Those who had traded textiles handled them with respect, aware of their value. New garments were not worn immediately. They were carried home, saved for the right moment. When the market gradually emptied, color remained in memory rather than sight. The calm browns, muted reds, and soft whites lingered like an afterimage. They had shaped the day without demanding attention, just as status had existed without being declared. For those who lived in this world, clothing was not a costume. It was a quiet agreement between person and community, a way to move through shared space with dignity, restraint, and understanding. And in the gentle rhythm of the market, that agreement held everything together, thread by thread. In the market of Tenochtitlan, daily life moved to a rhythm shaped not by commands or schedules, but by presence. Women and children were not separate from this rhythm. They were part of it, quietly guiding its pace, softening its edges, and giving the market a sense of continuity that stretched beyond trade. Their movements did not demand attention, yet without them, the market would have felt incomplete. Women arrived early, often among the first. Some came to trade goods they had prepared themselves: food, cloth, herbs, small crafted items. Others arrived to purchase what their households needed for the day. Many did both. Their familiarity with the market was deep and practical. They knew where to go, who to trust, and how long each task would take. Their movements were efficient but unhurried. A basket was set down carefully. Goods were arranged without flourish. Conversations were brief and purposeful. Women did not linger longer than necessary, yet they did not rush. They understood the flow of the day intuitively. Children followed alongside or slightly behind. Some were very young, carried or guided by the hand. Others walked freely, observing more than participating. They were present not as distractions, but as learners. The market was one of their classrooms, and daily repetition was their instruction. No one announced lessons. Children learned by watching how adults moved, how they spoke, how they waited. They saw when to approach and when to remain quiet. They absorbed rules that were never written but always followed. Women balanced many roles within the same space. A mother might negotiate a trade, then pause to adjust a child's clothing. A seller might hand goods to a buyer while keeping one eye on a child seated nearby. These shifts were seamless. There was no sharp division between work and care. Both existed together. This integration shaped the market's atmosphere. Voices remained calm. Gestures were controlled. Sudden movements were rare. The presence of children encouraged patience without needing to be stated. Adults adjusted instinctively, lowering voices, making space, slowing steps. Children contributed in small ways. An older child might be asked to carry a light bundle or deliver a message to another stall. These tasks were not burdens. They were moments of trust. Completion mattered less than participation. Mistakes were expected. If something was dropped or forgotten, it was corrected quietly. No one scolded loudly. The market did not amplify errors. It absorbed them and moved on. Women's knowledge shaped the flow of goods. They understood quality immediately, by touch, smell, or appearance. Their decisions influenced which sellers succeeded and which returned home with unsold goods. This influence was not expressed through authority, but through consistency. Sellers who met expectations earned loyalty. Those who did not were simply passed over. Children observed this power without ceremony. They saw that influence did not require loudness. It came from reliability and care. This lesson would follow them into adulthood. Throughout the day, women paused to speak with one another. These were not long conversations, but brief exchanges, updates, questions, reassurances. Information moved this way, quietly and efficiently. News of weather, crops, or family matters passed hand to hand, word to word. Children listened, even when they seemed distracted. They absorbed tone as much as content. They learned how concern sounded, how calm was expressed, how seriousness differed from urgency. The rhythm of the market adjusted around these interactions. Busy moments flowed smoothly into pauses. When a child needed attention, the pace slowed without complaint. When tasks were complete, movement resumed naturally. There was no sense of interruption. This flexibility was essential. The market was not a machine designed for maximum output. It was a living system designed to support life. Women and children ensured that this purpose remained visible. As midday approached, fatigue appeared quietly. Children grew restless. Women adjusted routines, offering food or rest without spectacle. A child might sit in the shade, watching the market from a lower angle, seeing only feet and baskets and the slow passing of time. These moments were not rushed away. Rest was part of the rhythm, not a deviation from it. The market allowed space for it. In the afternoon, some women departed early. Their tasks complete, they returned home to prepare meals, care for others, or continue work elsewhere. Others remained longer, maintaining stalls or finishing trades. Children's presence shifted accordingly, some leaving, some arriving with different adults. The market accepted these changes without resistance. No one marked attendance. No one tracked hours. Participation was fluid. What stands out is how little tension surrounded responsibility. Women were trusted to manage their roles. Children were trusted to learn. The market did not question these arrangements because they had proven themselves over time. By late afternoon, the rhythm softened. Voices lowered. Movement slowed. Children grew quieter, leaning against adults or sitting nearby. The energy of the market settled into something almost reflective. As people began to leave, women gathered belongings carefully. Children helped, learning again through action. Bundles were lifted, paths chosen, goodbyes exchanged without ceremony. The market did not close dramatically. It thinned gently as families drifted away. What remained was a sense of completion, not exhaustion, not relief, but fulfillment. The day had unfolded as expected. Needs had been met. Knowledge had been passed on without instruction. For women and children, this rhythm was not remarkable. It was simply how life moved. And for anyone listening closely, especially in the quiet space between wakefulness and sleep, this rhythm reveals something enduring, that a society can function smoothly not through force or speed, but through care, repetition, and trust shared across generations. At first glance, the market of Tenochtitlan might have appeared overwhelming. Thousands of people moved through a single shared space. Goods of every kind lay open to view. Voices overlapped. Paths crossed. And yet beneath this surface complexity, the market remained calm. There was no sense of disorder, no rising tension, no need for force to keep things in place. Order existed, but it was quiet, almost invisible. This order did not come from fear. It did not rely on constant commands or visible punishment. Instead, it emerged from habit, shared expectation, and long familiarity. People behaved not because they were watched closely, but because they understood how the space worked. The market was arranged deliberately. Sellers did not scatter themselves randomly. Goods were grouped by type, food with food, tools with tools, textiles with textiles. This arrangement was not enforced loudly. It was remembered. Returning sellers knew where to sit. Buyers knew where to walk. Over time, the layout became a map stored in collective memory. Movement followed this structure. Paths formed naturally between sections. People walked at similar speeds, adjusting instinctively to those around them. When space narrowed, bodies angled slightly. When space opened, steps relaxed. No one pushed. No one blocked deliberately. The flow resembled water moving around stone, steady, adaptive, unforced. Disputes were rare but not impossible. When disagreements arose, they did not escalate quickly. Voices remained low. Observers did not gather eagerly. The culture of the market discouraged spectacle. A disagreement was a problem to be resolved, not a performance to be won. In many cases, resolution came simply by walking away. If a trade could not be agreed upon, both parties accepted it. There was no sense of loss in refusal. Another opportunity would come. Time was not scarce in the way modern markets often treat it. Oversight existed, but it was subtle. Market officials, often judges, were present, but they did not dominate the space. They sat or stood quietly, observing rather than intervening. Their authority was understood, not advertised. The knowledge that fairness would be upheld was enough to discourage misconduct. This presence created confidence. Buyers trusted sellers. Sellers trusted buyers. The system did not need constant correction because trust had been reinforced through repetition. Those who broke that trust did not last long, not through punishment, but through avoidance. Avoidance was powerful. A seller known for dishonesty would find fewer buyers stopping. A buyer who behaved aggressively would find fewer willing partners. Reputation traveled quickly, even without announcements. Memory served as regulation. Children observed this order closely. They saw that rules were not shouted. They were demonstrated. They learned that behavior mattered even when no one seemed to be watching. This lesson was absorbed quietly, becoming part of their understanding of the world. Sound played a role in maintaining order. Because voices remained low, tension did not spread easily. Noise often amplifies conflict. Here, calm contained it. Even at peak hours, the market's hum never sharpened into chaos. The physical environment supported this balance. Open space allowed air and movement. Water nearby softened sound. The absence of walls prevented pressure from building. The market breathed, expanding and contracting with the day's rhythm. There was also an understanding of limits. Sellers did not claim more space than necessary. Buyers did not linger where others needed room. This mutual respect prevented congestion before it began. Space was shared, not competed for. Importantly, order did not mean rigidity. People adapted constantly. A stall might shift slightly. A path might bend around a group. These changes were accepted without frustration. Flexibility was part of the system, not a threat to it. As midday passed and fatigue appeared, order held. People slowed rather than grew impatient. Pauses increased. The market adjusted its pace downward, preserving calm instead of pushing through exhaustion. By afternoon, the system had proven itself again. Thousands of interactions had occurred, most without incident, many without words. Goods had changed hands, needs had been met, and yet nothing felt strained. This was the success of the market. Not volume, not speed, not profit, but stability. The ability to bring many lives together without friction. The ability to function without constant correction. As people began to leave, order remained until the end. Stalls were packed carefully. Paths cleared naturally. No one rushed the closing. The market thinned as gently as it had filled. What remained was not silence, but ease. The kind of ease that comes from a system working as intended, not through force, but through shared understanding. In Tenochtitlan's market, order was not imposed from above. It rose from within, shaped by habit, respect, and the quiet agreement that chaos was unnecessary. And for those who lived within this rhythm, that quiet order was not remarkable. It was simply how things were done. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the market of Tenochtitlan no longer felt as it had in the morning. Nothing had gone wrong. No signal had been given. Yet the energy of the place began to soften almost imperceptibly. The steady hum of voices lowered in tone. Movements became slower, more deliberate. The market did not stop, but it exhaled. This pause was expected. The people who gathered here understood the shape of the day without measuring it. Morning was for arrival and exchange. Afternoon carried weight. And somewhere between the two, there was always a moment when effort eased into rest. Sellers adjusted their posture. Some shifted from standing to sitting. Others leaned lightly against baskets or wooden frames. Goods remained displayed, but hands rested more often at their sides. Conversations shortened. Where earlier there had been constant motion, now there was stillness woven between actions. Buyers responded in kind. Footsteps slowed. People lingered slightly longer before making decisions, not from hesitation, but from fatigue. The need to rush had passed. Those who had already secured what they needed moved aside, finding shade or quiet corners rather than continuing to walk. Shade became valuable. Under simple coverings or beside tall structures, small clusters formed. These were not gatherings for discussion or trade. They were pauses, shared, silent, and brief. People stood or sat close without speaking much, united by the simple need to rest. Food reappeared, but differently than before. Meals eaten at this hour were slower, fewer bites. Longer pauses between them. A piece of food might be held for a moment before being eaten, as if the body needed reassurance before continuing. Smells were lighter now, softened by heat and time. Children felt this shift clearly. Earlier curiosity gave way to tiredness. Movements became smaller. Voices dropped. Some children sat quietly, watching shadows move across the ground. Others leaned against adults, absorbing the calm without understanding its cause. Adults noticed without comment. No one scolded restlessness. No one demanded attention. The market allowed fatigue to exist without resistance. This acceptance prevented tension from building. Rest was not treated as weakness. It was treated as part of the cycle. Even trade adapted. Negotiations grew shorter. Prices were not debated endlessly. Both buyers and sellers understood the limits of energy. If agreement did not come easily, it was postponed or abandoned without frustration. There would be other days. This restraint preserved harmony. Instead of pushing through exhaustion, the market chose softness. This decision was not made by leaders or officials. It emerged naturally, guided by shared experience. Everyone had felt the day slow before. Everyone knew what came next. Sound changed subtly. The market's hum thinned, becoming more spaced. Individual conversations stood out briefly, then faded. Silence appeared between voices, not empty but restful. The absence of constant sound made the remaining noises gentler. Water played a role here. Nearby canals reflected light lazily. The faint movement of water against stone added a low, steady presence. It did not interrupt thought. It encouraged stillness. People glanced toward it without intention, letting their attention drift. Some sellers closed their eyes briefly, not sleeping, just resting vision. Others stared into middle distance, hands still. These moments were short but meaningful. They restored balance. This pause did not disrupt order. Goods remained safe. Paths remained clear. The market did not unravel because people rested. In fact, it held together more securely because of it. Rest prevented mistakes. It reduced irritation. It reminded everyone that the market served life, not the other way around. Time felt different here. Without clocks or schedules, the pause expanded naturally. It lasted as long as needed and no longer. Gradually, movement returned. A seller stood again. A buyer resumed walking. Voices rose slightly but not sharply. The transition was smooth. No one announced the end of rest. It ended because energy returned, quietly and collectively. The market flowed forward again, refreshed rather than strained. This rhythm repeated every day. It was learned early, observed often, and rarely questioned. Children would remember it later, not as a rule, but as a feeling. The sense that effort had limits, and that honoring those limits made everything else possible. By late afternoon, the market felt steadier than before. Not busier, not louder, but settled. The hardest work had passed. What remained was completion rather than ambition. Looking back, this short rest reveals something essential. The market of Tenochtitlan was not designed for endless motion. It was designed for sustainability. It recognized that people could not give constantly without pause, and instead of resisting that truth, it built space around it. In this way, rest became part of order. Not a break from it, but a quiet reinforcement. A moment where nothing urgent happened, and because of that, everything continued to work. For anyone listening from far away, drifting toward sleep, this pause carries its own lesson. That even in a vast, complex society, there was room to slow down, to let the day breathe. To trust that stillness did not mean failure, but balance. And in that balance, the market endured, one gentle pause at a time. The end of the market in Tenochtitlan did not arrive with an announcement. There was no call that signaled completion, no sudden change that told everyone it was time to leave. Instead, the market ended the same way it had begun, gradually, almost unnoticed, shaped by the slow turning of the day rather than by instruction. As the sun moved lower, light softened. Shadows stretched across the ground, lengthening between stalls and pathways. Colors that had appeared balanced and clear in the morning now grew warmer and deeper. Reds darkened, whites softened. The market seemed to sink gently into itself, as if preparing for rest. The first sign of ending was not departure, but stillness. Sellers paused longer between interactions. Buyers stopped browsing without purpose. Conversations shortened, becoming quieter, more practical. No one hurried to finish one last trade. There was an unspoken understanding that whatever remained could wait. Hands began to move differently. Instead of arranging goods for display, people began arranging them for return. Cloth was folded carefully, not for appearance but for protection. Baskets were reorganized so weight would balance on the journey home. Items were counted, not with anxiety but with calm attention. This careful packing was part of the ritual. Nothing was thrown together hastily. The market respected endings as much as beginnings. How one left mattered just as much as how one arrived. Canoes reappeared at the edges of the market space. Some had been waiting quietly throughout the day, tied loosely, rocking gently against stone. Others arrived to collect sellers who had traveled by foot earlier. Goods were loaded with care, heavier items placed low, lighter ones secured above. Movements were practiced, efficient, and silent. On land, footpaths thinned. Those who lived nearby left first, slipping away almost invisibly. Others waited, finishing small tasks or speaking briefly with familiar faces. There was no crowd pressing toward the exits. Departure was staggered, spread naturally across time. Children sensed the change before it was visible. Their energy shifted from curiosity to anticipation of home. They stood closer to adults, watched packing with interest, and occasionally helped with small tasks. The market had taught them all day. Now it was teaching them how to leave. Sound followed this transition. The steady hum that had filled the space for hours thinned into individual notes. A final exchange here, a quiet farewell there. Footsteps became more distinct as overall noise decreased. Silence did not arrive suddenly. It seeped in between sounds. Even disputes dissolved. Any disagreements left unresolved were set aside without frustration. The end of the day did not invite conflict. It invited continuation, tomorrow or another time. The market was not a place for closure in the dramatic sense. It was a place for cycles. Officials who had overseen order throughout the day did not make their presence felt at the end. There was no need. The market did not require supervision to finish properly. Habit and shared understanding carried it to its conclusion. As stalls emptied, the space between them widened. What had once felt full now felt open, though not empty. The ground retained impressions of baskets and feet. The air carried faint traces of food, cloth, and smoke. The market's presence lingered, even as its activity faded. Light continued to change. The lake nearby reflected the lowering sun, sending soft brightness into the edges of the market. Water sounds grew more noticeable as voices faded. Canoes pushed off gently, their paddles dipping in unhurried rhythm. For a brief time, movement and stillness coexisted. Some people were still packing, others were already gone. The market existed in between, no longer fully alive, not yet absent. This in-between state was perhaps its most peaceful. Those who remained moved slowly. They took final looks at the space, not out of sentimentality but awareness. Tomorrow, the same place would fill again. Nothing permanent needed to be said. As the last sellers departed, the market did not feel abandoned. It felt completed. Paths lay open. Stone cooled as the day's warmth faded. The city around the market continued its quieter evening routines. Meals prepared, fires lit, families gathered. The market had fed into these rhythms and now stepped back. Night approached without urgency. There was no race against darkness. People carried what they needed and trusted the city to guide them home. The causeways and canals welcomed returning travelers as calmly as they had welcomed arrivals in the morning. What remained after the market ended was not absence, but readiness. The space was empty of people, yet full of memory. Tomorrow's exchanges were already implied by today's departures. The market did not close, it rested. For those who lived in Tenochtitlan, this ending required no reflection. It happened every day. It was expected. It was reliable. The market's quiet ending reassured them that life remained balanced, that effort had been matched by rest, that nothing had been forced beyond its time. For those listening centuries later, especially in the gentle drift toward sleep, this ending offers something rare, a vision of completion without noise, of community without pressure, of a place that knew when to let go. And as darkness settled fully and the market space merged back into the city's calm, the day ended not with finality but with promise, ready to begin again, softly, with the next morning's light. When the last footsteps faded and the final canoe slipped quietly away, the market did not disappear. It remained, changed, quieter, and almost weightless. In Tenochtitlan, the space that had held thousands of lives throughout the day now rested in stillness, as if remembering everything without needing to show it. The ground lay open. Where baskets had once been placed and cloth unfolded, there was now bare earth and stone, marked only by faint impressions. These marks were not meant to last. By morning, many would fade. Yet for a while they remained, subtle reminders of movement, of presence, of work completed. The air felt lighter. The layered sense of food, fabric, water, and smoke had thinned, leaving behind only a trace, something familiar but no longer distinct. It was the smell of a place that had served its purpose and released it. Nothing lingered too strongly. Nothing demanded attention. Sound had almost entirely withdrawn. What remained were gentle background notes, water brushing against stone, a distant call from somewhere in the city, the soft shift of evening air. The market no longer spoke, but it listened. In its silence, the city's quieter rhythms became audible. Light changed everything. As the sun lowered and then disappeared, shadows settled into corners where stalls had stood. The open space absorbed dusk evenly without resistance. Stone cooled slowly. The warmth of the day did not vanish at once, it faded with patience. This patience was important. The market had never rushed people in, and it did not rush them out. Even after everyone had gone, it allowed the day to end at its own pace. Nothing snapped shut. Nothing was sealed away. What remained most strongly was order. Not the visible order of arranged goods or directed movement, but a deeper one. The sense that everything had happened as it should. Needs had been met. Effort had been shared. No excess remained behind. This absence of excess mattered. There were no piles of discarded food, no broken objects, no sense of waste. The market did not leave behind evidence of strain. It left behind balance. For those who lived nearby, passing the empty market space in the evening, this sight brought reassurance. It meant tomorrow would come as expected. The same paths would fill again. The same rhythms would return. The emptiness was not loss, it was preparation. Children who had spent the day there might glance back briefly, then move on. The market was already becoming part of memory rather than experience. Lessons learned during the day, how to wait, how to observe, how to move among others, remained with them even as the space itself grew quiet. Adults carried the market with them too. In the food they prepared that evening, in the tools they used, in the cloth they folded away. The market extended into homes without needing to be mentioned. What remained was also trust. Trust that sellers would return, that buyers would come again, that fairness would hold without constant supervision. This trust did not need to be renewed daily. It endured because it had been proven repeatedly. The city itself seemed to respond to the market's rest. Canals reflected the darkening sky more clearly now. Movement slowed everywhere, not just in the market. Fires appeared in homes. Conversations turned inward. The city prepared for night as gently as it had prepared for day. From a distance, the market space blended back into the city. It no longer stood apart as a center of activity. It became simply another part of the landscape, quiet, patient, waiting. The transformation was seamless. For someone unfamiliar with this world, the emptiness might feel surprising. How could a place so alive hours earlier now feel so calm? But for those who understood it, this calm was the market's final function of the day. It reminded everyone that life did not need constant motion to be complete. In the quiet after everyone left, the market revealed its deepest purpose. It was not just a place of exchange, but a space that taught rhythm, how to begin gently, how to move steadily, how to pause, and how to end without noise. This rhythm extended beyond trade. It shaped how people thought about work, rest, and community. It showed that systems could function without pressure, that order could exist without force, and that endings did not require drama to be meaningful. As night settled fully, the market space held nothing, but it lacked nothing. It was ready for the next morning's mist, ready for footsteps and voices, ready to receive baskets, cloth, and quiet greetings once more. And in that readiness there was peace. For those listening now, far removed in time and place, that peace remains the final gift of the market. A reminder that even in a vast and complex city, daily life could unfold calmly, and that when everyone left, what remained was not emptiness, but balance.